The briefing is on the new government. And first of all, I must say that I'm happy to have a government. After several years of political crisis and repeated elections, it seems to me that we have now a government that has the potential for ruling for several years, 2, 3. Usually it never ends after 4 years because a variety of reasons. And I'll say a few words about the formation of the government. And I'll say, I'll concentrate on foreign policy and national security of this government. And inevitably, I'll have to say something on the legal arena, which occupies the attention of many Israelis nowadays, and is also, I think, an issue for the international community. And if I have time, maybe I'll say a few words about the economy. About the formation of the new government. The formation of the new government took longer than Netanyahu expected. He, despite the fact that most parties are close ideologically, and he needed to ask for an extension from the president. What it's quite clear that Netanyahu gave in to most of the demands of his coalition partners. And he was criticized for this behavior, primarily by his own party, leaving little ministerial posts for his colleagues. But he, of course, had other things in mind than that to meet the demands of his colleagues. The Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, got more money than before. The religious Zionists, or what's called the religious Zionist party, was able to increase or to make a clear presence in several ministries that they have never had a presence before, like the Treasury, like the Defense Ministry. We've seen also a dissection of ministries, which is not entirely new in Israeli politics. Every government sometimes invents new ministries in order to satisfy the needs of political needs. Somebody needs a ministry, okay, we'll arrange him a ministry, like to be a minister, likes to be in the government, okay, we can arrange a small ministry for him, or to divide the ministry into 2, and we arrange a ministry for somebody that has enough political leverage to get it. However, there are several, very problematic decisions made by Netanyahu, and I'll mention 3. First of all, I'm talking about the Ministry of Defense. The religious Zionist leader, Smotrich, demanded to be appointed as minister in the Ministry of Defense, with in charge of the civilian administration in the territories. He obviously wants to take care of his constituency, which is settlers. That's not, he has more than the settlers, but this is his main preoccupation. And you have to understand that the military and the civilian administration is a military unit, headed by a major general appointed by the military. And it seems that he wants to appoint the head of the civilian administration and to run the civilian authority in the territories, which primarily Area C, which we'll say a few words about it later on. Also, he demanded and succeeded, in an unprecedented way, to create a committee to nominate the chief rabbi of the military, which is a general, a one-star general, usually, and it's usually rabbis that had some military record. And this time, the committee will be headed not by a military person, but the chief Sephardi rabbi and several other civilians, including a former chief rabbi of the military. And this is something which disrupts the very important principle of the unity of command in the military. In the military, we have one source of authority. This is the chief of staff. The military makes all the appointments. And now we see an intrusion of civilians making appointments in the military. This is basically something that could bring about, private militias. This is, in my view, a dangerous development. Also, Minister Ben Gvir, he's a minister of police, or the minister of national unity, as it's called now, national security, as it's called now, received full control of the border police. And I want to explain. The border police is a paramilitary unit under the command of the police, but its manpower comes from IDF recruits. So the IDF allots manpower to the border police, and when the border police operates outside the Green Line, or with the exception of Jerusalem, of course, then it operates beyond the formal borders of Israel, and until now, it has been under the command of the military. And if it operates in an area like Jenin, it is a military commander in that area that decides how the border police will be employed, what kind of engagement rules it has, and where it is to be deployed, when and how. It seems that Ben Gvir wants to take over the operations of the border police beyond Israel's borders. This is also, in my view, a dangerous potential development. It's not clear yet if this is going to happen according to the agreement. It's not clear. But there is a potential there for great friction between Ben Gvir and Netanyahu that promised him this latitude. On the positive side, we should remember that not all promises by Netanyahu are being kept. And we may see a situation in which the promises to the religious party, National Religious Party, and to Ben Gvir will not be kept because of opposition of the military. The chief of staff, which is ending his service tomorrow, expressed already his opposition to this type of arrangement. And obviously, the Minister of Defense, a former two-star general, will also be against this arrangement, which is for the military unacceptable, and I think also in terms of democracy quite unacceptable. We should not allow, the establishment of militias or potential militias. It is only the military that makes the appointments in the military, and not civilians. Now, if we go to the national security challenges in this government, I think we'll see much continuity. First of all, we should be aware that it is viewed with suspicion in parts of the world, in many parts of the world, and particularly in the West, where it counts for us. And it will probably aim to project stability and continuity. There will be continuity with in relations with the US. The American affairs will be managed by, of course, by Netanyahu, the prime minister. It has always been so, the portfolio of the prime minister, but also by Ron Dermer, a confidant of Netanyahu, who was appointed as the Minister of Strategic Affairs. It doesn't matter what kind of name this ministry has. Basically, it will aid Netanyahu to deal with the Americans. Interestingly, the American reaction so far to what everybody calls a right-wing government has been muted, and they say we accept the democratic process in Israel, and they look forward looking with every government elected in Israel. I think we may see even on one issue at least, even less tensions with the Americans because they have given up, at least formally, on the nuclear agreement with Iran. And I'm not sure that it is over. I think that the Iranians still would be interested in such an agreement, and probably the Americans will run to sign it if the Iranians change a bit their tone. And but in any case, what Israel will try to do in Washington is, first of all, to try to convince them to produce a plan B, which they don't have, and also maybe to gain legitimacy for Israeli freedom of action in vis-a-vis Iran. On the Palestinian issue, we may see more friction, actually, because this government is less willing to have to tolerate the Palestinian Authority misbehavior, as it's seen in Jerusalem, help to terrorists, and it's had already cut transfer of money to the Palestinians because they are paying to the terrorists that are in Israeli jail. The Temple Mount, I think that could be a point of friction. We manage the situation, in my view, well. The Ben Gvir that wanted to go to the Temple Mount and to keep his promise to his electorate, he went to the Temple Mount, made a check, on his promise, and it was at 7 o'clock in the morning. Nobody was there, and there was a UN national security, debate. Nothing came out of it, and there was no really, any negative reaction to it, neither in the Arab countries that we have relations with them. We just have last week the Negev Forum in Bahrain convening, and in which all countries that were partners to the Abraham Accords came in, and it was a business-like meeting without any repercussions. Indeed, the Abraham Accords so far are okay with us. Nothing came out of it, and basically they are interested in us doing something about Iran, and all the rest is secondary. There is much talk about expanding the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia. The previous government said it, and also Netanyahu referred to it, expanding the Abraham Accords. I'm not sure that Saudi Arabia is the next candidate for expansion, primarily because succession struggle is not over. MBS has not entrenched himself as a ruler. There are a lot of cousins who have an appetite and they want to also a nice job to be the king of Saudi. And so if they'll ask me and suggested in some quarters that we should concentrate actually on Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest Muslim country with benign Islam, with previous interactions with Israel, just like Saudi Arabia. And I think probably this is a more fruitful venue for the Israeli foreign policy, but we'll see what happens. Another important country that businesses as usual is, of course, India. Modi is a friend of Israel, as much as we can see friends in international relations, but the current orientation of this government is nationalist Hindi with little like for Muslim countries, so they see us an ally. Business is blooming with India. They also changed their pattern of voting in international fora. So India is fine. Another important country in the world is, of course, China. I think, again, we'll see a continuation, much continuation. Recently, we've become much more cautious in our relations with China. Even the Biden administration admitted that. And we have, due to American pressure, established mechanisms for making sure that no technologies that can be seen as dual technology is transferred to China, and economic relations will continue to the benefit of both countries, while technological espionage on part of the Chinese will continue in our country, and we'll have to deal with it separately. I see a worsening of relations with the diaspora, with the Jewish diaspora, particularly in the United States, whereas reform and conservative movement are rather strong. This government, because of its composition, with a lot of ultra-Orthodox and the so-called religious Zionist party is actually representing the modern religious that are more critical of reform and the conservative movements. So we may see more friction on that issue with American Jewry. In other countries, this type of movements are less present, have less influence, and hopefully this government will do its best to make sure that American Jewry will continue to be united, at least on this issue. It's obviously not united on many other issues, on support to Israel. Reform movement in particular is distancing itself from Israel because it sides with the more radical woke issues in the United States. And we are, of course, very different in our political and social outlook than those type of political quarters. The main challenge remains Iran. And we'll have to broaden out the legitimacy for a strike. We'll push for snapback sanctions. It's not going to be easy. The Europeans are resisting it because they want the business with Iran. They want the Iranian oil to be on the market. Regime change, I don't think it's realistic. The Israelis understand it. But maybe we can do something to weaken the current regime. For example, cyber, which we've done, PSYOP operations, which again, we've done before, we can intensify it. Maybe we can supply light weapons to the opposition, via the Kurdish areas in Iraq. But we should be aware that the Iranian opposition nowadays is not united. It doesn't have leaders. It's very atomized, and don't hold your breath about the fall of the regime. It's not. This is, by the way, its weakness as well. It's its strengths. Its strength is that there are no leaders and cannot be easily oppressed. So they are very, decentralized movement. On the other hand, with lack of leaders, they cannot organize effective opposition to the regime. The big question on Iran is, will Bibi order an attack? As we know, he is very cautious. In my view, maybe too cautious when it comes to use of force. But time is running out. So we'll see what happens. In Syria, we'll see a continuation of the campaign between wars, that its main goal is to prevent permanent Iranian military bases being established in Iran, and transfer of what we call tie-breaking weaponry, primarily PGMs, precise guided munitions, which could be more costly for us. We tried, to prevent it. For this goal, we need, to some extent, the cooperation of Russia in Syria. They are there, they are our neighbors. And this, to a large extent, also explains our policy vis-à-vis Ukraine, vis-à-vis the Ukraine war. We don't want to be seen by the Russians as anti-Russians. And this is an important strategic need for Israel. In Lebanon, we just last government made a gas agreement with the Lebanese government, what's called the Lebanese government, in order to buy time and to, the former government, to prevent a war. I don't think this is the right policy. Actually, myself and my colleagues at JISS advocate preemption in Lebanon. We'll see if this government adopts such a suggestion. In Gaza, we try to buy time also with Qatari money, and they pay. I don't know for how long we can buy quiet in Gaza, but it's quite clear that the money that is being spent does not lessen the enmity of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza against Israel. And it's a question of time until our deterrence erodes over time, and we'll see again, them sending missiles to Israel, and we have to probably at some point in time to react. Another important challenge, which is a new challenge for Israel, is the Israeli Arabs. And the Israeli Arabs, we've seen in 2021, made a lot of trouble during our operation in Gaza. And we have to understand, most Arabs in Israel, Israeli citizens, are law-abiding citizens. But we need only a small number, 1, 2, 3, 4% of the Arabs in Israel to create havoc on our logistical lines and to create a lot of trouble in the mixed cities in which Arabs and Jews live. And for that, we need to divert many forces. We're in the middle of building a national force for that, a national guard. We'll see, if we'll be successful to do it. Generally, Israel needs much more money to spend on defense to improve the IDF capabilities and also the reserves. I don't know if you are aware, this week we are having a big conference on on the reserve corps, which have been neglected for years. And the many contingencies we face, and particularly a multi-arena war, multi-front war, will need much larger force than we have at our disposal. So we need much more money. The IDF already asked for 10 billion shekel to add to it, to the defense budget. In my view, they probably need more. I don't know how much money this government will divert to this issue. And now maybe a few words about the legal arena, which attracts much attention and commotion in the Israeli society. I'm not a legal expert. I'm a political scientist. And we should be aware that in every country, almost in every country, there are three branches. We call it separation of powers: the legislative, the parliamentary, and the judicial. And there's never been a separation. So it's not real separation, but a certain balance between those three branches of the government. And what happened in Israel over time, in my view, and the view of many in Israel, on the right as well as on the left, is that this balance has been eroded into giving more power to the judicial system. And the legal reform suggested by this government, and I'll mention just a few clauses. The first one is changing the way judges are selected, so the politicians will have a greater voice. In Israel, for example, the Supreme Court of Justice, the justices are elected by a committee in which the politicians are a minority. In this committee are sitting also Supreme Justice judges, as well as representatives of the Bar Association. I know that you in America have entirely different systems. Supreme Court justices are appointed by the most important politician, the president, and a political body, the Senate, is approving it. In Israel, it's very different. It gives much more weight in the nomination process to the judiciary. So there is a need, in the view of many, to change that. Also, the reform includes a clause on overriding, what's called overriding clause, in which the parliament will have the ability to override a decision of the Supreme Court. Nowadays, the Supreme Court declares a law that was passed by the Knesset unconstitutional. We don't have a constitution, and that's it. And this government wants to do it by a majority of 61, which is a small majority in my view. But maybe there's going to be some give and take on that issue. In any case, one reason in which it's cited by the Supreme Court is reasonableness. What's reasonable? Which is not defined by law. And there were precedents in which the Supreme Court decided that something is unreasonable, ignoring the law, the letter of the law, because it's not reasonable. So the law is secondary to what the judges think it's reasonable or not. And so they want to abolish the legal justification for this reasonable possibility. Another important change in the reform is who is going to nominate the legal advisors to the ministers. In the current situation, the legal advisors in the various ministries are actually subordinated to the Attorney General. And they are not advisors. They say it's kosher or not, and that's it. Which I don't think is a situation in most other countries. and the ministers want to appoint their own legal advisors to serve their goals and not the abstract, goal of providing justice, which the Attorney General represents. Having said that, as you hear, I'm in favor of reform, but I think that the way it is done is somewhat problematic. The opposition successfully framed this reform as a threat to democracy. Basically, giving the government, the administrative branch, tremendous power. And yesterday, for example, we had about 80,000 people demonstrating against it. So there's much, tension on that issue. It came to the point that the president of the state, Bougie Herzog, decided to intervene between the opposition and the government in order to try to mediate this crisis, which is a crisis. Many people feel very badly about it. And the government, in my view, should indeed try to be more attuned, not necessarily accept the opposition positions, and at least to give the appearance of a more, a longer process in which everybody is heard and everybody's position is taken into consideration. The debate now is extremely heated. There are people that are talking about civil war, and of course, we don't need this type of atmosphere. In any case, political atmosphere in Israel was very tense before, primarily on the issue Bibi or not Bibi. We don't need another issue. I think the main job of the government is to maintain social cohesion and social solidarity, because when a war will come, and the war will come, we need everybody to fight side by side. And I want my leftist friends to be next to me. I'm old, but next to my son. And I've done my duties, military duties, for many years. And so this is an important consideration that I'm not sure is taken enough into, when they weigh the merits of such a reform. And it's, it's like, everybody's, some of you are married here, you want something, your wife wants something else. And sometimes you give up because of harmony. You understand, okay, I can't get my way. He probably, we give up. The man is a strong, we know who is the strong sex. And so, because harmony is important even in a country. And I think that the government should deal with this issue in a more sophisticated way. Sometimes the process is very important, and to push your view because you have a majority, is not always the wisest thing. And I don't want, the opposition to feel that there is a tyranny of the majority. And this is my view of this particular issue. And I hope that the government will show willingness to discuss this issue. We see already some signs of it, and hopefully this issue, which is an issue which you have it also in the United States. What are the limits of the Supreme Court? What issues can it discuss or not discuss? This is something that is not unique to Israel, and hopefully we'll find the right balance that everybody can live with.